know the person before we just know what it is we are saying. And that means that we have to critically examine the nature of authority. Here, I'm going to say something that bishops don't like to hear. But the reality of the situation is that in the late 60s and early 70s, bishops got very, very confused. Now, we only draw bishops and priests from the pool of people that are in our time and our society. But most bishops didn't have a clue about what went wrong, because they assumed, because they were formed for years and years in a Catholic family. Do remember that when I went to the seminary in 1980, you had to have your parents' marriage certificate. Okay? I remember my parents they weren't too sure about me back and forth. I come from a very big family, and I'm the sixth boy. I'm a lower middle of about 13 kids. And Mom was sort of busy. She had all these kids, and she taught. And I needed their marriage certificate. And so I came home one Friday night from university, and she was pretty harried. And I said, Mom, I need to talk to you for a second. Okay, no problem. So we came in, and I said, Mom, I need your wedding certificate so I can get a copy. No problem. It's all here in the buffet. All the papers are in the buffet, right? So she went in, was flipping through. She said, what do you need our wedding certificate for? And I said, well, I'm going to the seminary, and I have to prove I'm legitimate. She said, you're a seventh natural child. Of course you're legitimate. And then she turned right back, and she started looking for the paper again. And she said, you're going where? But for the reality of most people, that is not just a commonly accepted reality anymore. But it was then. Janet Smith, who wrote about this whole question of Humanae Vitae, its reception, etc., now 10 plus years ago, said we were not ready, okay? We were not ready for the cultural tsunami that hit us in many, many, many ways. We thought what we had was strong. Little did we realize that God has no grandchildren. It's true, eh? God only has children. God does not have grandchildren. It's, you want to build your house on a solid foundation. It doesn't matter how solid your parents' foundation is. You got to build your house on a solid foundation. That's the reality. Each and every generation must be won over to Christ. And the bishops were not ready. And they blew it on power and authority. They blew it. They confused power with authority and authority with power. And they had not trained their people at that time well enough, and frankly are not training them well enough now. They're working hard, but it's always hard to come from a rear guard position. So that's what we need to do. And you need to be able to look at Humanae Vitae and recognize that it wasn't just for the bishops. In fact, most of these encyclicals written on sexual matters and on social justice matters are written to all people of goodwill, to you and to you, according to your specific jobs and roles. And with the collapse of authority in the 20th century, because it looked as if all fonts of authority had blown it badly, then what authority is there? Authority will come about, as John Paul II has said many times, through teachers, through those who are examples of faith, through those who will be able to live their faith regardless. Martyrs are always martyrs. Martyrion just means witness. And the power of witness is incredible. It really is. And you can be a pretty strange witness and still be a witness, see? When I was a pastor in a little place up in Peterborough, I'm back in another little place in Peterborough, I was really pushing the whole idea of natural family planning. Man, I pushed it. We had 300 families, 90 baptisms a year. I mean, I was pushing natural family planning. And I got a teaching couple to come in, and I had invited everybody. We'd phoned, we'd mailed, I'd preached on it for a couple weeks. One couple showed up. One couple. And I got to tell you, and I have their permission to say it, they weren't the most promising couple. The Lord hadn't blessed them with good looks, didn't have a lot of higher education. They were a rough pair. They really were. In between running the goat farm and doing the construction back home, they were a rough bunch. And I was sort of down, and the teaching couple, John and Sheila Harrington, said, Father, this is just the couple the Lord wanted here, because they need the one-on-one. So 4 weeks in a row, they met at my rectory, and we went through the whole thing. And it was amazing, because our Lord took that couple, and they were the couple that evangelized the entire parish, because they'd stand outside and they'd say, this natural family planning stuff is great. Eric would say, I've never had so much good sex in my whole life. It's great. It's great. It's great. And the guys would all stand around going, oh, really? And Pauline would say, this is really neat. He was such a pain before, but now, he's good to get along with. And they were pretty graphic, too. I'll spare you the details. And people looked around, they said, wow, if this has made an impression on them, what could it do for me? For us, we're far better material. But that's the reality. The reality is that I believe we have to be able to look at that. They were people of authority. And I would posit to you, you are people of authority. You are people of authority, but authority is nothing if it is not used. There is nothing worse than seeing parents that will not exercise their God-given authority. There is nothing worse than a teacher who will not teach. Sad, eh? And when you get to heaven, as we hope to, the Lord's going to say, what did you do with the people that I sent to you and gave to you? Well, I didn't want to upset them. Or I didn't love them enough to get to know them so that I could be able to teach them. It is more important. If you want to teach Latin to Johnny, it's more important to know Johnny than Latin, right? Because I will listen to someone who loves me, but I'm not going to listen to somebody who doesn't love me. And you know why that's so hard? It takes a lot of time. Love takes time, right? I can't do it on the stopwatch. And if I want to be able to really be that person in authority, I must love before I speak. To make a friend and be a friend before we bring a friend to Christ in whatever form that teaching is going to be able to take place. That, then, I think, is that nature of authority. It's one thing. You can't just bewail the fact that something went wrong in the past. We don't live in the past. The past is gone. Only our Lord is the Lord of history. My past, it's there. I only have now, and I have the future. And therefore, what we have to do is to be able to call people to this. As Father Paul said, as the head of the Priests for Life Canada, one thing I constantly have to try to do is to be able to encourage priests. I have to encourage priests. Speak up. Who cares if people are going to say this? They might be angry, somebody will say. I said, yeah, they might. That's true. They might do this. They might write a letter to the bishop. God forbid that you get a letter to the bishop. Or worse, a phone call. But the reality is, do you love them enough to want to be with them? Do you love them enough? And are you willing to be loved enough? And I would say this is part of your job, is to be able to love someone into the fullness of being, to be able to love them into the fullness of the teaching of the truth and not just the truth. Because we have to love people into authority and be able to say, you can do it. And if you don't believe me, think about St. Catherine of Siena, the most unlikely person to have been able to restore the papacy to Rome. Who did she think she was? This rather strange, perhaps, somewhat anorexic character who had visions and who didn't have any education, and she was just this young whippersnapper, and she travels all the way to Avignon, and she does something that nobody had been able to do, even with the force of armies, to be able somehow to convince this pope to come back to Rome, and thereby to be able to restore his authority. And I would say, you're unlikely too. You are, but that does not make you less of a person of authority. We are where we are for a reason. Every single one of us are where we are for a reason. And if you look at how people have been restored, God can use even you, and he can use even me, to be able to build people up in courage. Have courage. Okay? Be able to have a heart that is so full. That's where courage comes from. Have a heart that is so full that it must be able to speak. And I tried, the prophet said, not to speak, but it built up with me, and I spoke. And that's all it takes. I think, too, we need to be able to look critically and recognize that we need to talk about what it means to be human. One of the hardest problems we have in our society